welcome to this video on the standardization of laboratory identifiers. A laboratory identifier is, in common sense, just the name. So hemoglobin is the name of a laboratory test. We're talking about standardization because in a healthcare network like the VA, for instance, there's many separate laboratories and each of them have different names that they use for those tests. And so we'll be discussing how do we standardize those tests. So for instance, hemoglobin may be called HB, may be called hemoglobin dash a name of a particular site. And we want those all to be the same so that when we go to use the data, it's easy to work with and we can aggregate over all the separate sites. So now that we've talked about what it is, let's talk about what it isn't. It isn't standardization of laboratory results. So those same laboratories may still report the result of the test in a different format. So for hemoglobin, they may report it in percent, as in 45%. They may use a decimal, 0.45, or some combination or other variant of. And so that's a separate topic. We call that standardization of results, but won't be covering it here. Probably we should talk a little bit about our design philosophy. So when we went to design this program, we aimed to have it to standardize the identifiers to something that everyone in general would understand. We didn't try to tailor it to any specific problem. So depending on your problem, you may need to adjust the code slightly, depending on if you want to group them into larger groups or whether you want to get very nuanced into a particular test or a particular method for that test that you're interested in. And the reason that we did it that way is because we followed the HEMA guidelines, and if we look here on this page, we can see how these guidelines came about. And in the first introductory paragraph, it talks here about use cases. And so we shot for a general use case. You may need to use something different for your use case. But that's not to say that we didn't think about that in the design. We did design the program to allow users to adjust the codes as they need to. So we provide them with metrics and information about the test so that they can understand what that test is and then make the change that is appropriate to their particular project. Along the same lines, we've also used standards for when we did the standardization of the code. So we didn't make up our own standard. We used LOINC codes and we extended the LOINC system into a hierarchy so that we can assign tests to LOINC codes that may be very specific or maybe don't have enough information to assign a very specific code to. But that being said, we still have a standard, and people within or outside the VA recognize the LOINC standard for laboratory identifiers. We also try to standardize all the codes in the VA system. We didn't try to do it just for a particular project. So regardless of what project you're doing, this system will be useful for you. Most of the time when people have a project that they need to have laboratory data for, they standardize just the small section that's useful for them. And when people do that repeatedly over time, they often overlap each other's work. And so one of the main purposes of this project was to provide a baseline so that regardless of the project you're using, you can still have a common service where you can get your data from. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the program. The program has three main parts. It has the assignment process, a quality control process, and then a user selection screen where users can see the codes that were assigned and also pull data that they need for their project. So let's talk about the first part, assignment of the codes. The program has multiple different ways that it can assign a code. It can do it by looking at an individual site. So for instance, West Haven VA in Connecticut, we can look at our labs at a particular point in time and start assigning codes from the most popular to the least popular. That method works really well sometimes because you can see which tests are near the test that you're assigning in terms of popularity. Oftentimes panel tests will be adjacent to each other because they're ordered together so their counts are the same. So that information about the adjacent tests can help you. And so we have an option for that where you can assign them based on a single site. Another option that's helpful is doing a string search for a part of a test name. For instance, hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C has this very distinct string in it, A1C, and so if you search on that string, you can often pull those tests in with a fairly sensitive and specific catch. It doesn't work in all cases, especially when the names are have a lot of variation to them. A third way that you can assign the codes is by LOINC codes, and there are some existing LOINC codes for the tests within the VA system. They do have limitations, and so it doesn't work in all cases, but you can do it that way. As we assign the codes, we also have a progress report so that we can monitor our progress and see how far along we are, and we'll show you that. Outside of the code assignment, we have a quality control piece that allows us to review the codes to see how well they've been assigned. And that can help us find errors in the code assignments. And it also gives us an overview of what we've done and how well we've done it. The third part is for users when they go in to select the codes that they want. And those codes have lots of metrics associated with them so that they can see exactly what that test was. And there's just a whole bunch of different types of data the user can review in order to select the codes that are right for them. So enjoy the video series and let me know if you have questions. Thank you.